All right. So, welcome everybody to this first webinar in the series of the complete guide to organic AI marketing. This particular webinar is the first webinar in the series. It's called What Every CEO Gets Wrong About AI Marketing, and It's Not What You Think. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen for a second, and I'm going to share audio as well. Okay, perfect. And I wanted to get started with this. I don't know, have you all seen the movie A Star Is Born, the newest one with,
No.
Lady Gaga and Bradley Cooper? Okay. So I'm going to just play this clip for you for a minute because this kind of represents the premise of this webinar. Let's just see what Jackson Maine says to Lady Gaga's character.
Look, talent comes everywhere. Everybody's talented, but everybody in this bar is talented in one thing or another. But having something to say and a way to say it so people listen to it, that's a whole other bag. And unless you get out there and you try to do it, you'll never know. That's just the truth. Look.
And it's so funny because Lady Gaga in the next scene, it was cut off right before she said her thing. She says, I think Jackson Maine asks her, so, what do you think? Are you going to do it or whatever? He asks her a question and she says, I don't like it because she doesn't want it. She doesn't feel like as though she has she doesn't feel like as though she has anything worthwhile to share. She doesn't feel like as though it's her, that her unique voice, something to say, is something that anybody will want to listen to. She doesn't have confidence in herself, which is what a lot of us do. And I think that, that scene means so many different things beyond just that movie. It's kind of a perfect representative of what we face in our everyday lives. I think Lady Gaga there was suffering from imposter syndrome, right? And so that is really the premise of this. It's the fact that AI can liberate you. What are the mechanics of how do I create this content? How am I going to edit it? What am I going to say on the blank page? Where am I going to distribute it? Am I going to post this on social media? Am I going to do a newsletter? How am I going to get subscribers to my newsletter? How am I going to do a webinar or a speech? How do I get people to book me for speeches at events, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? What it does is AI takes care of so much of a lot of the mechanical stuff, a lot of the blocking and tackling, so that we can remove ourselves from that and start to really figure out what is it that we want to say. What is that thing that we are going to say that'll make people pay attention? Because to be frank, we're inundated by messages every day. Our reticular activating system, which is just a fancy word to say our brain that focuses on things that we want to focus on and ignores everything else, is constantly ignoring all these commercial come-ons that arrive at us from our social media feeds and our radio and our, email, etc. So how can we break through that, that blind spot that our reticular activating system erects for us? And AI is not going to do that for you unless you figure that out, unless you figure out what it is you're going to say. And I like to think about AI. This is the way I see AI in a way. This is an image of one of those old-fashioned bosses with his secretary. He doesn't know how to type. He doesn't, maybe he knows how to write, maybe he doesn't, but what he does is he decides. He's the decider. He's the thinker. He's the strategist. And he has a team of people who carries out his orders, right? And so in this picture, you have him dictating to his secretary, and she's probably writing in shorthand, etc., to kind of get everything he's talking about in his stream of consciousness, right? And that is what AI is for us today. AI is essentially a way for us to liberate ourselves from having to figure out how to say something on the blank page, right? And instead, AI is our secretary. And we can reverse this now. Now AI can be the male secretary, and we're the boss, or it could be, plants or whatever. But the bottom line is that's the way I like to think about AI. So what is the big mistake that CEOs or that marketers are making with AI, right? And I've seen this, with the company I worked for before this. is they're just creating AI content to save time and money. I mean, I've seen, Sharon, you've probably seen this too. Content creators now, whether it's designers, whether it's writers, whether it's people who create content on social media, it's sort of like it's a buyer's market right now. It's there's been this huge layoff of marketing executives that have been happening. I know two people who had to either pivot their content agencies or had to literally close down their content agencies after ChatGPT exploded onto the scene. Because why? Because people are deciding to use AI to just create content ad nauseum, right? And the end result is just a bunch of blah content. It's content that has the telltale signs of in a world where, or consider this, or whatever, all those kind of telltale little, what my sister calls it, that terrible AI language that is just flooding the market right now, right? That's not what AI is all about. Well, it is kind of what AI is all about, but that's not what AI is all about. AI enables us to be like this boss over here so that we can do the thinking, right? So that we can have something to say, right? So how do we have something to say? And I've got a lot to say about how to have something to say. Okay, what I wanted to first of all talk about is, and I'm gonna look at you all. And so how do you have something to say? How do you really kind of distinguish yourself out in the marketplace so that then you can apply AI to amplify that message? And yes, to save time and money on content creation, or actually do more than what you could have possibly done, even if you had had a team. Okay, so let's get into having something to say. First of all, I really want to hearken to the whole category design premise, right? So category design, I'm sure some of you all are familiar with this, but so if you bear with me, I'll repeat the arguments for category design. Category design is not about competing. It's not about being better, higher quality, more luxurious, cheaper, faster, so that you can compete better with your competitors. Because at the end of the day, everything is copyable. Is that a word? Anything can be copied. Whatever advantage you have over your competitors, if you're in the same category of company as your competitors, that advantage disappears really quickly, right? So it's really a question of temporary incremental advantages that can then be erased almost immediately because of digital technology, because of the world is a tiny place now, and we can even manufacture things by 3D printing, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So what's the way? What does category design advocate? It advocates being establishing your own category, creating a completely new category, industry category, right? So I love the example of Starbucks. Starbucks, when they exploded onto the scene in the late 80s and early 90s, Kevin, I don't know if you were living in Southern California at the time, but I remember I was living in Long Beach, and I just started seeing these, Starbucks coffee shops all over the place, right? Starbucks in the United States, not in Europe or Italy and France, because they already had this sort of coffee house culture, right? We know Italians as being, people in Italy who live in this coffee house culture. And actually, Howard Schultz got that idea of coffee house culture from his trip to Italy. And he brought it to the United States, and he invented this concept or he reinvented it for the US market, this concept of the coffee house. It was a new thing, a category that didn't even exist at the time, because back in the day, there was the coffee shops, which you'd go in, it was kind of a greasy spoon, and a coffee shop was really just kind of a diner. The names are interchangeable depending on what geographical area you are in the United States. A coffee shop where you could get your pancakes, your BLT, and by the way, give me a glass of coffee, not a glass, a mug of coffee, and the coffee was so-so, gas station coffee was terrible, et cetera. But there was nothing, apart from a few key areas in the United States where, like in Austin, you had little coffee shops. College towns had little coffee shops, okay? But it wasn't a major thing in the United States until Starbucks established it, right? So that's an example of a consumer new category. There's examples of new categories in the tech space. So, Mighty Networks is just one of these kind of companies that have come up and are enabling companies to create their own private communities. Now you have Skool, Skool. Kevin and I were just talking about them, which is sort of community plus education. So there's this new category out there of creating private communities as a way of generating a community of rabid fans. And Gina Bianchini, she CEO of Mighty Networks, she actually wrote a book about the topic called, I think the book is called Communities, if I'm not mistaken, right? So basically, that's what category design is. It's creating a new category. It's being able to sort of be the category king or queen within your own category. And it starts with having a different perspective on things, right? Introducing new vocabulary, getting people to change their paradigm, their way of thinking about things, the way of looking at the world, right? And so if anybody here has any examples of, of new categories that you all have seen invented or designed out there, let me know, right? So I have another few examples that you all know about the whole gluten-free movement, but gluten-free flour tortillas is a great new category, as well as other kinds of gluten-free things, because because there is a real problem with people with what's that disease that sometimes gluten creates stomach upset? Celiac disease. And this gets me to the how to create a new category, how to design a new category, is you're identifying these problems that have not been solved before, right? So celiac disease, I think until pretty recently, I would say within the last 20 or so, 30 years, had not been recognized. There's a whole slew of new diseases that have been recognized and have just been discovered. The pharmaceutical industry is great at that. Sometimes they invent diseases that don't exist. Sometimes they identify diseases that do exist, and they're creating and they're designing much needed medicines and categories for this. There's a great example of, so the whole Viagra thing and now Cialis, that came about because I can't remember if it was Merck Pharmaceutical or whatever, but Johnson & Johnson, I can't remember which pharmaceutical company it was, but this major pharmaceutical company identified a problem that was previously designated as impotence, right? Impotence was considered not a disease so much as he's impotent. So it was sort of like, it was an identity that was not a good identity to have, right? You don't want to be impotent, just like you don't want to be a serial killer, etc., right? I don't want to equate those things, but it's an identity that was a negative identity to have. And what this pharmaceutical company did is they said, okay, let's reposition the problem, right? So category design is not just necessarily about discovering new problems, so much as you can also reposition problems that existed before into new areas, right? And so what they did is they invented this condition called ED, erectile dysfunction, okay? Which became a medical condition, which they then solved with Viagra and then Cialis, the different companies. And now there's a whole bunch of other copycats out there. There's even generic Viagra, Cialis, whatever. And so that is the way to design a new category, right? Is identifying what these problems are. I think what I did with the startup book is I identified, how are you going to go out there with a thought leadership approach to the market? How are you going to go out there and design a new category? Write the book about it. People have been doing this for ages. Okay, so I'm not saying that I invented this and I identified a problem that wasn't identified, but what I'm doing is I'm actually putting it explicitly out there. So the problem is, how am I going to invent a new category in a practical way? How am I going to design a category in a practical way? Because the category design people, the category pirates, they talk about category design. And then if you read the book, The 22 Laws of Category Design, you get a whole bunch of stuff that people do, but it's like, it's not codified in a single solution that is sort of like the pillar of everything else, right? So everything emanates from, in my new category of the startup book category, everything emanates from the book, right? So what I identified is, okay, how can I design a new category and spread the word about it, right? And people can get frozen by those 22 laws of category design that the category pirates talked about. What I did was I said, okay, I'm going to solve your problem by saying, look, start off with a book, write a book about it, because the book is going to be your pillar content, if you will, about your category. It's going to be the wellspring of knowledge that you can pull from when you want to start sharing content on social media, when you want to start creating content for your newsletter, when you want to talk about stuff in speeches or on podcasts, etc. Your book is that sort of ultimate source for you. So that's the problem that I solved with my new category, right? So you identify a problem, and I think, and then one of the things that I think is so unique when it comes to category design and having something to say before you start using AI to duplicate or to create this content cascade is the problem. I think the problem is the thing. It's like the people don't want to buy aspirin unless they know that aspirin is for a headache, right? So you identify the headache, you put a name to the headache, say you're having a headache, what's the solution? Aspirin. Or you might have you might have severe headaches, and then there's another solution for that. But you identify the problem because aspirin, you can say that aspirin can make you feel better, it can take away your discomfort, etc. But because it has been associated with headaches is the problem. I've got a headache. It's unbearable. I can't go on the rest of the day with my headache like this. What's my solution? Aspirin. Coffee house culture. I want a place to go hang out with my friends where there's no alcohol, and a place where I can go that I can bring the kids or the grandma, etc. Coffee house culture, right? There wasn't anything that existed before. England is a different story. I think this is just a little side note. Pubs are a great place to bring your kids and your grandparents, and they have pub culture in England that we don't have in the United States. So what was our solution to being able to have these sociable places? Coffee houses. So identifying the problem is really the key. And if you can identify the problem, if you can create these visceral emotions by understanding what these unsolved problems are, and you call it out, and then you have a unique solution, then you pretty much have a free roam, a free reign to create your category and be the category king or queen. Okay. And then obviously, what is your unique solution for your problem that you've identified, right? And so that's where you come in and you say, okay, I'm going to do this differently. And I think one of the things that Kevin and I were talking about yesterday was, Kevin has a new methodology of marketing called the SMAC methodology. And I think it's really cool because what came first with Kevin was, what can small, medium businesses do to compete with the super large companies? The large companies that have all the financial resources, they have all the human resources to be able to apply to marketing, right? So it's like the United States versus some guerrilla force out there. The United States can overwhelm an area with firepower and with troops, etc. But what does the smaller force have, right? So in the case of a small medium business, what can a small medium business that came up with a microbrew do to compete against Budweiser or Coors, etc.? And that's the SMAC marketing solution. The SMAC is, remind me what it is. It's shoot. It's no. Well,
shoot,
shoot,
move, adapt, communicate.
Shoot, move, adapt, and communicate, which is sort of like it's been taken from. I think it's either special forces or
it's a military strategy used to clear urban centers quickly, basically, of threats. So you shoot, you know who you're shooting at. You go in, you kind of have a very clear target of who your target is. You shoot, you move. Basically, you're on the move. You're not staying in one place because you'll get overwhelmed very quickly by the enemy. You adapt. You learn from what's happening with civilians fleeing or enemy attacking, whatever. You adapt to it, and then you communicate with your team and to your audience, and clear communications. And so that military experience, I was in the U.S. Navy. I was on warships, and I'm very fascinated with history, war theory, Alexander the Great, many of these tactics and tacticians that are out there, and I've incorporated that into a marketing methodology that allows, it's a David versus Goliath kind of strategy that equips small businesses to be not fight on the big guys' ground, but to bring the big guys to their advantage, which is agility. Being small, the advantage that a small medium-sized business has is they're agile. And so that's where it comes from.
And so what was that kind of unsolved problem that you identified that you solved with the SMAC framework or the SMAC methodology?
Well, I think the biggest thing is marketing's a battlefield, and people are entering the battlefield very ill-equipped. They're coming with slingshots and BB guns and what have you, not knowing what they're entering into. So we've shifted the thinking to know what you got, do it, inventory what you got, leverage that, go in and be a sniper, not a machine gunner, basically. You don't have enough bullets to be a machine gunner, but if you know who you're shooting at, you could be a very good sniper. And so, that is by giving confidence, all about confidence. Small businesses are not confident competing with their bigger adversary or competitors. And so we give them the confidence they need to shoot, move, adapt, and communicate in the field. And so,
I love it.
Yeah, that it's a framework and it's a mindset that helps small businesses turn their fear into confidence.
Yeah, I love it. And so we're watching the design of a new category right here in real time, right? And what Kevin is doing is he's identified this problem of, marketers coming in with the equivalent of slingshots and BB guns. We're trying to, dislodge, Folgers coffee or Budweiser, or maybe not dislodge them, but, carve out a market that they dominate and make a name for ourselves and establish a beachhead, if you will, in the market, right?
One example, that I think everybody could relate to, and then we'll, I tie it up, is, the Gillette, for years owned the shaving industry, right? Was it Schick or, but these big shaving companies, well-known names, right?
Yeah.
Harry's came out of nowhere, was a disruptor. They were not, and they were very narrow who they targeted. They didn't try to target everybody who needed to shave.
Was this the Dollar Shave Club, guys?
Dollar Shave Club, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Sorry, Dollar Shave Club. Yeah, I was using Harry's, but Dollar Shave Club. And they very much went after people that were tired of buying too many blades. They didn't use, they wanted to be efficient. They wanted to be more eco-friendly. They wanted cheaper. And Dollar Shave Club kind of went after that market, and it sold for $1 billion, $3 billion. And so, but that's taking the SMAC method, basically shoot, moving. They knew who they were going after. They moved quickly to go after those opportunities they saw in the marketplace. They adapted quickly, and they communicated to their audience what they needed to hear. And they were able to disrupt a very large company. And those bigger competitors couldn't move as quickly as they could.
No,
so
exactly.
They had to buy them out, basically, to get them out. Yeah.
So, and I love what you talk about. You used, the Dollar Shave Club as an example of a SMAC marketing example, but it's also a perfect example of what I'm talking about right here, which is, have something unique to say, solve a unique problem with a unique solution. So they essentially invented a new category, which is subscription shaving. And now, subscription boxes are all the rage. I don't know if they necessarily invented the subscription box itself, but they definitely invented it for the shaving industry. And now we get, like my kids, they get stuff delivered all the time on a subscription basis. You could subscribe to stuff so that you can get, healthy food delivered. And you don't, if you have certain diet restrictions, or if you want to embark on a new, carb-free diet, you can have these things uniquely customized and sent to you. So that's a new paradigm. That's a new strategy. That's a new category. And it solves this unique problem of, how can I shave? How can I get my shaving stuff without having to go out to the store and pay exorbitant amounts of money for the blades? I think it's kind of the same model that these guys had, that the printing industry had. I'll sell you my printer for cheap, and I'll sell the ink for very expensive. So yeah, I love that. So what's your unique problem? What's the unique solution to solve this unsolved problem, right? And it could be an unsolved problem for a niche market that maybe other people outside the niche already have their own particular problem solved, but you're a unique niche or niche and you don't have it solved. Okay, perfect. All right, so that's one way of having something to say. I don't know if you have any questions or comments about what I talked about with category design and really focusing on the problem and the unique solution before I go on to the next thing.
Yeah, what Kevin shared, that puts him in the badass category.
Yeah, Kevin is a badass.
Was that me? I'm sorry. I was just hanging up on a call. Somebody called me. I want to hear I'm a badass. What did I do? I missed it, Melvin.
Oh, just listening to you with your thought pattern and what you bring to us and our learning, and it's very actionable. It's not highfalutin where we're like, yeah, this dude, I can never reach that level. So thank you for throwing that line out there for us to reach that level that you're at.
So I'm going to share my screen because I want to share the next part of having something to say. And that is, so I don't know if any of y'all are familiar with Naval Ravikant and Dan Coe. So Naval Ravikant, he wrote a book, or actually he didn't write the book. Somebody else wrote it for him.
They're on Twitter, right? They're big Twitter guys.
Yeah.
Dan. I follow Dan on Twitter. Great stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, and Naval is a VC. He's a venture capitalist. He's a company. He's a tech founder, etc. in the Silicon Valley. And he there's a book that was written based on all of his teachings that this guy found on YouTube, on Twitter, on his blog. It's called The Almanac of Naval Ravikant, right? So the Almanac of Naval Ravikant, he talks about that you are the product, right? So because everybody and their dog is out there now coming up with niches and positioning and unique value propositions, etc., what Naval talks about, and I guess he kind of knows what he's talking about since he's he's multimillionaire, maybe billionaire, I'm not sure yet. And he says you are the product, right? And then Dan Coe expands on what Naval Ravikant says, and he talks about the fact that each one of us has a unique DNA, so to speak, of a combination of experiences, knowledge, perspectives, personality, things that we've learned. There is nobody that's exactly like you, Sharon. There's nobody exactly like you, Melvin, or Kevin, or like me, or anybody that's watching this. There's nobody that's exactly like us. So what can we do to infuse our unique learnings, our uniqueness into what we talk about in our marketing, right? And so Dan Coe actually, in one of his YouTube videos, he actually talks about basically writing a book outline as if you're going to write a book, but instead of writing the book, you share on social media, you share on videos, you share in your newsletters, etc., all the content that is within that book outline, as if instead of writing the book is out there. Right. And he says, okay, what is the book of your life? And the book of your life is, what are your unique goals? You have a unique goal. I have a goal of helping I have a son who's 19 years old. He's got special needs. He's probably not going to be able to live independently ever. He's going to need somebody's help with him. And so I have a unique goal of creating this community, this almost like a village. I call it a ranch village, is the sort of like the working term that I have. That is going to be this place where people can live with their special needs adults, kids, or siblings, or cousins. And the special needs adults because nobody thinks about special needs adults. Everybody thinks about special needs kids. But what happens when they become adults? Do we just warehouse them? No. We got to give them something significant, something that they feel as though they can contribute and feel useful in society, right? And where they can feel fulfilled because they're actually doing something active, physical, etc. So my whole concept is what's called a ranch village, where special needs adults can work with their, with typical adults, friends, family, etc., doing agriculture, animal husbandry, arts and crafts, whatever, and living in kind of like almost like a combination rural village type scenario. That's my goal. My goal is to create that. It's very unique to me, right? You might have different goals. So you talk about what your goals are. You talk about where you've traveled. You talk about, obviously you don't just make it all about you, because this is about the client at the end of the day. So what Dan Coe talks about is, how can I take my own unique experience and edify my audience? What can I take from my experience, my successes, my failures, as a way to help other people identify with what I'm talking about and feel like, well, golly, if Fernando can do that, I'm smarter and better looking than Fernando, I can easily do that, right? So it's really that you are the product, right? And I wanted to share something. No, I'm going to share that in a minute, right? So think about how you can share content, whether it's in your blog, newsletter, social media, etc. And obviously, we're going to get into AI in just a minute. That is just uniquely you, right? And don't be afraid to express who you are, right? I think some of the most successful content out there are those people that are vulnerable and talk about failures they've had. So there's this guy who is a storyteller. He regularly gets up on stages and he does story slams. So there's poetry slams, and then there's also story slams. And he's sort of become a regular on the Moth Story Hour. The Moth Story Hour is something that you can listen to on NPR. There's a podcast about it where you get up and tell stories. And he said that he was not successful until he learned how to share some of those moments where he was most vulnerable, where he failed, or where he was in an embarrassing moment. And that's what made people just love his stories. And he won several awards, right? And it's funny because what he talks about is that people, they don't like to hear a success story until they saw that you came from rags to riches, right? So if all you talk about is how successful you are your whole life, people say, what a phony, or what, it's like, this guy's just showing off. I don't want to hear about that. I want to hear about real people, right? And what he actually said was, people prefer to hear about all your failures and then a success and then a failure again, because it's the whole concept in storytelling about the train wreck, right? Or the car wreck. Just can't stop staring at a car wreck when they're driving by, right? And it's the same thing in storytelling. So I'm not saying talk about what a failure you've been your whole life and then maybe you had one success and then the rest of your life. No, what I'm talking about is just don't be afraid to be vulnerable, and to talk about the lowest point in your life in a way that people can identify with you on, right? I have a lot of those things, and I'm just actually struggling myself to try and figure out, okay, how can I surface that, and how can I be bold enough to share that, and then talk about how I was able to overcome that, right?
I have a question.
Yes.
Quick. This addresses this. I've seen people be vulnerable to the point that they're just identifying now with one guy is working all these conferences. He's now got on the board of Canva, and he's a super talented designer, but he got on stage and talked about being molested. Okay. Mm-hmm. And people are, putting all this stuff on LinkedIn. I don't want to be identified as that person all the time. There's a certain line between vulnerability. I don't need to talk about childhood trauma, unless it's relevant to the story. But I feel like some people are using it. I don't know.
Yeah.
Or they think it resonates with other people and it lifts them up to also. That's why reality shows are so captivating, because people want to see everybody's dirt. And so how do you distinguish between that? Because I don't want to be too vulnerable, because I don't want to be identified that way. So sorry, I'm just,
No, I think you're right, Sharon. From my, I think what Fernando is kind of saying is the hero's journey, right? Is you kind of need a villain. There's got to be a villain in the story, and then
I agree.
You have to have a bottom that you hit that you overcome, kind of thing.
I agree.
And
kind of bringing it back to the point, I think what Kevin talked about is, I think you kind of paraphrased what I was saying the perfect way, the hero's journey. It's like, the perfect example of that is Star Wars. Luke Skywalker was just a farm boy under the thumb of his uncle and aunt in Tatooine, the desert planet, until he found Obi-Wan Kenobi and then Yoda. But what I'm saying is, don't shy away from it. And actually, the guy who wrote that book that I was talking about is called Matthew Dix. So if you want to look up his stuff, he's really good. Matthew Dix talks about, storytelling as a kind of a compelling thing to use, which basically leverages your own unique DNA, right? So your DNA is your knowledge and your failures and your successes and all that kind of unique perspective. Sharon, you're unique. You're very unique in many different things. And I'm not, but if you don't want to share things that are not relevant or that are just, kind of, I don't know, digging into or taking advantage of the current zeitgeist of being of victimology, right? I think that's sort of like a current zeitgeist. Everybody wants to be a victim about something. I think that's counterproductive, right? So I think that the last couple of things I wanted to talk about are thinking about thinking and about leveraging AI to get at this stuff for you, right? So thinking about thinking is Christopher Lochhead, who is kind of like the head category pirate. He's the author of several books or co-author of several books, including Niche Down, 22 Laws of Category Design, a Snow Leopard, etc. He talks about thinking, which is questioning the premise, right? So perfect example is, okay, regular thinking is, okay, how can I do better SEO than my competitor, right? Am I going to write longer articles? Am I going to write skyscraper articles like Brian Dean talks about with Backlinko, or how can I do better at SEM? So that's just thinking about it's thinking within the current premise, and it's not really thinking, right? Real thinking is questioning the premise, right? And so Rand Fishkin, who was the founder of SEO Moz, which became Moz, one of the primary keyword research platforms out there, along with Ahrefs and SEMrush, etc. Rand Fishkin has now completely left the SEO world, and he's even sounding the death knell of SEO, saying that SEO is basically going to die because he's now he questioned the premise, right? He said, okay, with the advent of AI and everybody competing on keywords, etc., what he's saying now is he's saying this thing called zero-click marketing, right? Zero-click marketing is, no, people don't want to click on stuff anymore, right? I think Sharon, you told me about this a lot. People don't want to click on anything anymore. They just want to see everything within your LinkedIn post, or they want to see everything within your YouTube video. They don't want, if you want to get them to click on your article to read further, they couldn't be bothered, especially my kids, right? Millennials or Generation Z, they don't want to click on anything anymore, right? So he's identified this thing called zero-click marketing. How do you get people to actually subscribe to your newsletter? Well, you suggest it, and there's other ways of doing this, but he identified this new thing called zero-click marketing, which is a new category that he and Amanda Natividad, who is his CMO that he hired for his new company, SparkToro, talks about. And he talked about the fact that marketing is now going back to the 60s and the 70s, the way it used to be, but now just powered by digital marketing. And what was happening in the 60s and the 70s? Well, we would go and talk at the Rotary Club. We would go and give speeches at, the industry association. And we would do local advertising because we didn't have the budget to do TV advertising, right? And so what's the digital equivalent of that is going on the podcast that appeals to your target market, speaking on the webinars that appeals to your target market, writing a guest article for an industry association that has a blog that's consumed by carpenters, Carpenters Association or Bricklayers Association or Heavy Equipment Manufacturing Association or what have you, right? And all this is to just kind of get back to what I was talking about, which is thinking about thinking. Let's question the premise. Let's not just go and iterate on how to write better blog posts that are going to get positioned on Google, etc. Let's figure out what is the actual what is it that's changing, and how can I look at this from 30,000 feet? How can I look at the forest and not be stuck within the trees, right? Okay. That's the thinking about thinking, questioning the premise, questioning whether you're a fish, am I actually in a pond or am I in a river or am I in the ocean, right? And let's go to AI. And I think that one of the most powerful things, and Sharon, you saw this at the meetup where Russ Summers spoke at, right? By the way, Sharon is, she runs the meetup that I started. Now she's the one who manages the marketing automation and AI meetup that meets every month in Austin, Texas.
Great job, Sharon. I saw that last night. Yeah, good job on that.
Yeah. Well, yeah, she does a great job. So there's this thing called custom GPT. You all know what custom GPTs are. And our friend Russ Summers, who was a speaker last month at the marketing automation and AI meetup, and he is also an interviewee on my podcast. So I interviewed him about the same thing. he created a bunch of custom GPTs that are like his marketing team. Right? So he talked about 3 categories of custom GPTs. One is the stuff that I don't want to do, right? So when it comes to a webinar, right? I want to run a webinar, but what do I have to do? I have to create the copy for social media. I have to send 3 emails a week in advance, and then 5 days in advance, and then the day before. I don't want to write those emails. And then I have to write the follow-up emails. Thanks for attending. Sorry you couldn't make it. Those are 2 different emails. Then I got to write okay, so that one category is I don't want to do it, right? So he basically created custom GPTs. He created one called Wendy Webinar, and he created another called Steven SEO or whatever. And then there's another category of custom GPTs that he calls the I don't know how to do it, right? So RevOps, he created a custom GPT called Roger RevOps. And Roger RevOps is an expert on HubSpot, right? How do I upload this thing to HubSpot? How do I use HubSpot to automate this sales marketing funnel, right? And so what he did was he identified all of the help documents for the current version of HubSpot, and he uploaded it into the custom GPT. And now all he has to do is go to Roger RevOps. Instead of back in the old days when we were at the office, he would just tap on Roger's shoulder, who was sitting, halfway down the row of cubicles, and he would say, "Hey, can you help me with HubSpot?" And then there's a third category of custom. Then there is finally Maya Mentor, which is in the category of I don't know what to do, right? And so I don't know what to do. Maya Mentor is custom GPT, and I have it right here, where, okay, I don't know what to do right now. And, Peter Drucker actually talks about in his books, The Effective Executive, I think, and management, in terms of what is the number one job of the executive, the knowledge worker, he actually calls him knowledge worker, is figuring out the right things to do, right? So when it comes to coming up with this unique voice, this unique thing that you're going to talk, having something to talk about, like Jackson Maine says, you can create a custom GPT, or in the case of Claude, you can create a project that is based on the writings and all the content of your favorite marketer, right? So you can create one that combines Brian Clark as a personal, he's one of my personal heroes. He was the founder of Copy Blogger. Joe Polizzi, who is the founder of the Content Marketing Institute, another one of my personal heroes. Or you could do it with all the writings of Phil Kotler, right? Or the writings of John Jantz, the founder of Duct Tape Marketing, or Seth Godin, right? And so you scrape all this content, you put it into the custom GPT, and then you use them as a sounding board to kind of write back and forth with somebody who is basically channeling your favorite marketers, right? And so Maya Mentor is that exact thing that Russ Summers came up with when he was working as a fractional CMO, to say, okay, what do I do in this situation? What would you do? And it's kind of a back and forth conversation that you can have, sort of like a free-for-all, sort of like a stream of consciousness conversation that you can have with somebody who is channeling Seth Godin or John Jantz or Phil Kotler, Brian Clark, Joe Polizzi, Ann Hanley, anybody out there, Jeffrey Brian Eisenberg, etc. Having something to say is really the beginning of, it's really the start of your organic AI marketing. Is first of all defining what is that differentiator? How can I solve a unique problem that my audience has with a unique solution? And then how do I come up with that unique solution? Is there anything within my unique DNA, talking about Naval Ravikant and Dan Coe, where you are the product? Is there anything within my unique DNA, the combination of experiences, education, family, etc., that I can leverage to help you with your unique problem that I've identified? Is there anything that I can get from my conversation with a custom GPT or a Claude project, right? Is there anything that I can do that is thinking about thinking, right? So if I can kind of like take myself out of the context and question the actual paradigm or the premise within which I work, right? So this is deep contemplation, folks. This is sitting back and really taking the time to think about stuff. And I want to leave you with this one passing thought. The thinking comes not from actually making effort and sitting down, blocking out 4 hours in front of your computer. Most of the thinking comes when you're in the shower, when you're walking, when you're riding your bike, when you're in your car. Those are when you get the biggest ideas, the most unique ideas, the thinking about thinking. And in his book, Psycho-Cybernetics, Maxwell Maltz talks about thinking for about maybe 30 minutes to an hour about your problem, and then saying to your subconscious, help me resolve this. I'm not going to make any more effort on this. I'm going to go about my day. I'm going to sleep, take a shower, go for a run, whatever. And it's miraculous how your subconscious actually will obey you and will give you these amazing, new, unique thoughts, right? And that's what you really got to do, And I know in this frenetic, busy world where we don't have time for everything, we have 1,000,001 things on our to-do list. Our calendar is absolutely full. We don't have time for that, but you got to make the time to think. You got to make your time to figure out if you have anything to say, because talent, like Jackson Maine says, is a dime a dozen. Everybody around you, whether it's the bar that, Lady Gaga and Bradley Cooper were in, or whether it's the Starbucks that you're in, or the Greasy Spoon Diner, everybody has talent on something. But do you have something to say? Have you thought about this unique thing that you want to say? And then once you have that, then we'll get into, in the next few webinars, how you can leverage AI to communicate that message to your audience. So thank you all very much for coming to this webinar, and we will see you next time, a week from today, I think Thursday, the 12th of December, at another webinar. Thank you.